Hello, welcome back guys. And in previous video we designed login page and we have used couple of components to reusable components so that we can make our login page attractive, right? And we have added CSS class over there. Now in this video we are going to add the login functionality. Of course we have added those functionality over here, but then this is just consoling the value. Instead it should trigger the API. For that we need to learn something. Using that we are going to trigger the API, and in this tutorial we are going to learn Vuex. And what exactly Vuex is? Vuex is an state management library or state management package, you can say, in Vue.js. Using that we can manage our state of the application, and we have actions over there. Using that actions we can be able to trigger the API call. Why we are going to use action, that also we will know. Why we are not using mutation, or we are not using the raw functionality instead of the action over there. So that all we'll know in this lecture. Let's start that. And very first thing what we'll do is we'll just go in package.json, and there we'll see if Vuex is there in our dependency. As we can see, all those dependency which is required to make Ionic application, those are listed here in the dependency section, but we can't see that Vuex over there. So we need to install Vuex in our application, and for that what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open client folder over here, and here what I'll say npm install and then Vuex. Alright, so this will download actually the latest version of Vuex, and using that we are going to create the state management for our application. We are going to see how enterprise level application is doing that, how a big application is doing that, but this time we'll do that in a modular way. So you might have seen that in a single file we are going to create a store, and then we are going to put all those functions in that single file itself, and then it will be working, right? But no. In this tutorial we are going to split that single file into multiple smaller modules, so that it will be very easy for us to maintain all those store components, and then we should be able to debug that easily. We'll see that in action. So you can see we have that store folder created over there which we created before, and then what I'm going to do here is, very first thing, I'm going to create one more folder inside that, and I'll name it as a modules. Alright, so for each of the functionality we are going to create a store, and we'll put those store inside the modules, right? And then we'll have one more overall index file over there which will be responsible for registering all those modules stored. And how we can do that, we'll see that in action. So very first thing what I'm going to do here is, inside modules, not modules, I'm just going to say, let me delete this modules. I'm just going to say directly, for authentication purpose, or the data which we are going to store for the user, we are going to, let's say we are going to create a separate store for that, and for that I'm going to say, let's say auth store, and I'll name it auth store, right? And here inside this I'm going to create one index.js file which will be the main file where all those action, state, and the getter will get registered. So first of all what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create all those files over here. So I'll create actions.js. This will contain all the methods which will be responsible for triggering certain APIs, or which will be responsible for updating the values using the mutation. So why we are going to use action? Of course action is going to return us promise in this case. So promise function will be much helpful in this case, so that we won't be getting into a callback hell, or we will be calling the API, and we can wait for that API to get back the data, right? For that we are going to create action. So what I'm going to do here is I'll just say actions equals to, and then all those methods we are going to define here. And then finally I'm going to say we need to export this action as well, so that we can use it somewhere else in the program. So next what I'm going to say is I'm going to create one more file, which is of course mutations.js, and here I'm going to say export, and then I'll say mutations, or you can say mutations equals to, not mutation, but it is going to be constant. We should not be able to change it from outside. All right, so now here also we are exporting mutations, and then we'll create one more file over here. I'll name that as a getters.js, and here I'm going to export getters. What this getter will do and what this mutation will do, we'll discuss that. First let me create this, and this time I'm going to name it as a getters. All right, next I'm going to create a store. Of course we need to hold the data first, right? Then only on that data we are going to perform certain operations. We are going to modify that, or we are going to get those data, right? For that I'm going to create a state.js, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create again the same thing, export constant, but this time I'm just going to do default state. I'm just going to create a closure of this state so that this state won't get modified from outside. Instead we need to modify it using mutations, and we need to mutate it using actions. So how we are going to do that? I'm going to expose certain, let's say logged in user, and logged in user by default is going to be null. Okay, and then we are going to say, we are going to store user ID as well, and that will store here, but explicitly also I want to store it. If you don't want, you can skip this. And then I'll say token as well, but we don't need token over here, so we can completely skip this. And what else we need over here? Okay, let's say for now we are going to use this to logged in user and then user ID. Later on if we want, we can add more variable over here, and that is going to be reside in store. All right, so finally what I'm going to say is export constant, and this time it's going to be of a state, so get default state, right? Why I created this default state? Instead we can just take a object and return it. That's not we are going to do here, because let's say if we want to reassign this state to a previous initial state, so we can use this get state variable, and then we can directly assign that. Then it is going to be, we don't need to go in each of the variable and assign back to the previous values, right? So I'm just going to save it, and then okay, so what this state is actually, this state is nothing but a state is called, in other words, it is data. So data which we are going to store, and then on this data we are going to perform certain functionalities. How we can do that, we'll see that. So now what this getters will do, this getters will do nothing. It contains all those methods which is going to return this specific state. And for how we can say, how we can use that, we'll see that here. What I'll do here is I'll just create one, let's say functionality. What I'll say is get logged in user, right? So this is going to be a getter method. What I'll do is it will return state and then state dot logged in user. Is it logged in user or what? It's logged user. So let's say it's going to be logged in user. All right, so I'm going to return the same from here. You just see how we are going to create actions, how we are going to create a state, how we are going to create index, mutations and all, and then finally we'll merge those all, and we will have a strong modular store over there which we can use in our application, and using that we can perform certain kind of API call, we can perform data mutation and all that we'll see here. So now here I'm going to return state dot logged in user. All right, so what it will do, actually what this will do is this getter will have access to a state, and then this state, it's nothing but it's kind of injection. So what it will do, when we are going to register this getters on a store, finally then state will automatically get injected in this specific function, each of the specific function which we are going to define here in the getter. And then since we have the access of a store, we can of course access those variable which has defined there in the state, right? So I have used get logged in user method here, and we can return that logged in user variable. All right, next I need get user ID as well. So for that I'm going to create one more function over here, getter function, and this will also have the access to a store, and I'll say store dot state dot, and I'll say user ID. All right, so we have created two states, so we have created two methods for getter, and this getter is going to be highly reactive. That is the way Vue is maintaining reactivity. As soon as you are going to trigger certain functionality, you are going to modify any of the state variable, this getter will get invoked immediately, and you will be getting the latest data wherever you are using this getter. Got it, right? So this is how Vuex is working, and we'll see that in action, of course. And then what next what we are going to do is we are going to create a mutation of that as well, so that we can modify those state variable through the mutation. Of course we can modify it from anywhere we want in the component itself, we can do that, but that is not the recommended way of mutating state, because any program can mutate that, and that can be, we can do that basically wrongly as well, not wrongly but mistakenly we can do that. So in order to avoid that kind of things, we are restricted ourselves to use mutation, so that we can change the state variable. And then once we know that a state variable is highly reactive, so once it gets changed, what a store will do, a store will automatically invoke the getter to take the latest value out of that. All right, we'll see that all in action. Okay, so now we have getter, we have state, and then I'm going to create mutation. So whenever we are going to create mutation, the recommended way which I saw in big companies, how we are going to use that is, of course, this mutation name should be in capital and underscore format. So we'll say set logged in and then user. This is how we are going to define the mutation method. And here I'm going to say so now this, since we saw that getters is having access to the state, right? So in mutation also we'll be having access to the state. So we'll say state, and then we can define the second parameter here as a data. All right, we cannot define more than two parameter in the mutation. So we'll have the second parameter as the data, and the data which we want to modify, of course. So in this case what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, we have a state, so state dot logged in user, right? State dot logged in user equals to, already, let's say we have certain variable present over there, so I'm just going to destructure those variable and let it be there. I will reassign the logged in user data over here. So logged in user, it will be there, and then I will use data as well here, right? Now the logged in user will be replaced with the latest data. All those keys will get replaced with this is nothing but a JavaScript kind of doing, assigning the variable. All right, so this is how we are going to use mutations. We are going to define mutations, right? Then we need to define one more mutation over here to change the user ID as well. So in that case what I'm going to say is set user ID. I'll delete this, and then set user and then ID. All right, so this time I'm going to say state dot user ID is going to be data. This data is nothing but is going to be user ID. So I'll say specifically it is user ID, so that we can identify, okay, this is user ID exactly, not the data or object which is unexpected. I'll save it. Now we have state, we have getters, and we have mutations in place, right? Finally, we are going to define actions. Okay, that we will do later. But before that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside the index file over here, right? And not here, but in the auth store. And what I'm going to do there, I'm going to import all those getter, state, and everything here. So state, it will take this specific state. I'm talking about this auth store, and we can create as many as a store we want, right? And each store will have all these 5 files. Each store will have actions, getters, mutation, and state. And then the question will be how we are going to use that state. We'll see that in action. For now, we are just going to set up this across our application. All right, I will try to explain all those concepts, all those, I won't be leaving any of those concepts so that you will miss any, you will miss any concepts basically. You will be completely ready after reading this tutorial, after watching this tutorial. You can work on any of the big Vuejs application project. You can create the application from scratch as well. So you don't have to worry about anything if you are watching this lecture from the very beginning. So state we have imported, and then I'll say mutations as well, right? And then I'll say, okay, we need that extension over here, JS, and then I need getters as well, right? So I'll import getters, right? And then I need one more thing, that is of course actions. So I will import actions, but we have not defined any functionality on action. We'll see that next. So actions also I have imported. And finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, export all these at once in a single object. State, mutations, getters, and then actions. Fine. So far we did nothing. We just created a couple of methods inside mutations, getters, and then we have defined a state variable inside the state file, and then we have imported all those inside a single index.js file, and finally we are exporting it as a single object. No more rocket science, right? So here finally we are done with the auth store. That's very cool to hear, right? Yeah, we are actually done with the auth store, and what we need is we need this auth store to be registered here in the store, the main store. All right, and how we'll do that, we'll see that in action. So what we are going to do here is we are going to say, okay, go back to this file, and very first thing is you need to import Vuex from Vuex. All right, now you need to create an instance of the Vuex application. Not application, but the Vuex library. How you can do that? I'm going to create a store, and of course we need to export this store so that we can finally register this store on the main Vue application file, so that it will be available for whole of the application, right? So for that I'm going to say export constant store equals to, and this is how we are going to create a new Vuex store, right? And then it's expecting an object. Fine. And then finally what here we can say, since we are going to follow the modular way means nothing, we will have multiple different store for handling different functionalities or to hold different data, right? So for that we are going to say modules. All right, and then we are going to import all those modules, and from where those modules will be coming, we can assume this auth store as a module, and this file will be considered basically as a module. So we are going to import this file over there, and then we'll use it here. Okay, how we can do that? Let's see that. I'll say import star as, that means I'm going to import all those from this index file, okay, from the auth store index file. So I'll say import star as, star means all, star as, and I'll give the alias name as well. So this time it's going to be auth store. Okay, you can name it whatever you want from, right? So here I'll say auth store and then index. since we have all those composed in a single index file, right? So finally we have in auth store here, and then here what I'm going to say, auth store is the key name by which we are going to see this store. Okay, this basically this store will be named as authentication store or auth store in short. So I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to destructure those auth store here. Basically what it will do, it will take all those actions, getters, mutations, and then state, and then destructure it inside this specific auth store. Cool, right? Finally we need to say one more thing, namespace equals to true. Why? Because we want to access this specific store with the name. That's why we are going to say namespace is true. Now you understood, right, why we are going to name this store. We can have a number of different store, and how we can identify that? We can identify using the name. Cool. I will just save it. All right. Now we have finally state ready for our application. This is as simple as that. You saw. You just need to create 5 different files for a specific auth store, or if you are going to create a new store, of course we are going to create new store next. So for that we need this 5 file, and then finally we exported that and then imported it on a main index.js file which is present on the store file. And this is nothing but a this is folder structure. If you want to follow different folder structure, of course you can follow that, and that but at the end what you are going to do is you should maintain that in such a way that it should be very easy to access, and it should be very readable, and that all concept we are going to use, right? So without talking much, what I'll do here is I will just register this store on our main application. How we can do that? I will go inside main.js file here, and you can see here the same way router is being used over here, right? So I will say, okay, I need store as well, and how I'm going to use that, you can see here store. Fine. So then I'm going to use store, and I'm going to say okay dot use, or else you can say, since this store will have single index file, right? So we are able to import that directly using this store. But instead what I'll do is I'll just mention index.js file, so that it will be more readable and you will be able to understand it, what exactly is happening, or which exact file we are going to import, right? So here we'll say use, I will change this method, and then I'll pass store. Boom, we are done now. We have created our Vuex store successfully. We'll save it and we'll see if it is there or not. How we can verify that? We can verify that in the dev tools in the UI. All right, and we'll see that in action. So fine, we have created this store, and then we have these actions empty over here. So using this action only we are going to trigger the API, right? But before that we should have a functionality, or we should have a library to trigger the API call or network call, right? Of course we can use inbuilt JavaScript fetch, right? Fetch is there to call certain APIs or network call. But in this case what I'm going to use is I'm going to use Axios. If you will come here at the very beginning of setting up the project, I have installed Axios over there. You can see here, right? So Axios is nothing but a library to call the API, right? So let's go back to src, and I will say API. Fine. Now this API, I'm going to create a file which will contain all the routes. Okay. So I will have a url.js file. Here what I'm going to say is export, and then what I'm going to say is export. How we can do that actually? Are we going to export the URL directly from here? Yeah, of course we are going to do that. So I'll say export export constant, and then this time we are going to use login URL, right? So I'll name it as login URL, and then there should be a base URL as well, right? Base URL of our server, so that we should be able to trigger those requests, or else we don't have to mention that base request in each of the URL, right? For that I'm just going to use one more export constant, and this is going to be base URL. I can say base URL equals to, right? And how I'm going to use this, I will say import. So basically how it will work is, I'm not going to export it since export is not required here. So I'll say constant base URL equals to import dot, in Vue we have this way of importing the environment properties. We already saw how we can access that in Golang, right? But in Vue, this is the way we are going to utilize the environment property, and we'll define those in env properties after this setup. So I'll say meta, and then meta will have env. All right, and here, so those env property which is present there should have the key with name vite underscore, so that Vue will be able to pick this, since we are going to we are using actually vite plugin to bootstrap our Vue application. So I'll say vite and API URL. Cool. So now we'll be having the base URL over here, and then I will just use this base URL plus I'll say /login. All right, but this login actually exists in which module? We can say again export constant and then auth module, right? So we can say auth base path, auth base URL we can say equals to, and then it's going to be /auth, I believe, /auth, right? Why we are going to do this? Because of course this way we are going to make this code much more flexible, and we are going to reuse certain kind of variables or functions. So now you can see here this base path, okay, auth is there, right? So here we can say base URL plus auth base URL, right? And then the exact path, which is of course /login in this case. I'll save it and I'll go back to API folder, and here we should have a functionality. Using that we should be able to call our API. How we are going to do that? Let's see that in action. So I will try to create that functionality as much as flexible as we want. Okay, if you want to make it more flexible, of course you are free to use those functionality and modify it. All right, so let me create the API file. So I'll say api.js will contain all the not API, but here this time I'm going to say rename api-client.js. okay, we are going to create wrapper on the Axios, okay, so that we can pass the data in the way we want, right? So very first thing is, here what I'm going to do is I'm going to export constant, and this is get API client. This is going to be a closure. If you are aware of the closure concept in JavaScript, is as easy as it looks. Okay, so here what I'm going to say is I have one function const get instance equals to an arrow function. Okay, what this will do is this will return, okay, this client need to be passed here. This client is going to be of type any client, right? Basically we are creating get API client in such a way that we'll just pass client and then it should be working. We are centralizing those libraries so that if later point of time we want to change it, we can change it easily We don't have to change thousand of functionalities, right? If I'm going to use Axios directly in the function. So if there's 1000 API function, so we have to change everywhere. But no, we are not going to do that. Instead, we'll just create a wrapper, right? This is concept of, you can say, interface abstraction. We are going to implement the actual implementation, right? We are going to hide the actual implementation, and then the interface will be available to use. We'll be using those interface, and it will be then much more flexible, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to return get, and before that we need to define all those method here. And how I can do that, I'll just say get equals to async, and then we can say URL will be there, params will be there, right? And by default I'm assigning some value to the params, and then headers may also be there. And then when will come on the API, right? We can pass headers, body and everything to the request, right? So that all we are expecting here. So app options will also be there if we want to pass certain data, right, from our specific component or from our specific JS file or anywhere from the program, right? We can send those data as well in the this API call, and then we can take out those data on interceptor, view interceptor. And now this is the new term, right? What is view interceptor? Okay. So what does interceptor means? Interceptor is nothing but, in general terms, interceptor is going to intercept something, right? Let's say one country is firing missile to another country, and in between some country can intercept those missiles, right? That means those missile is getting caught by the different country, right? That is concept of intercepting. Here that means same. We are going to intercept the request which is going to be triggered by our component or page, right? If you are having any doubt, you can put down your comments in the comment section. I will try to explain it further and in the very easy way. So now we can say, okay, request has been intercepted, and then the data which we want to take out from those requests, we can take out those data. Or if let's say we want to put some more data on that request, we can put those data on the request, and then we'll have those data in the server, right? So that's what we are going to do here. So app option also I'm going to assign empty, and then of course it's going to be of array function, right? Here what I'll say, any of the client you will be providing, I will call get method on that client, and I'll pass URL, and then I'll pass params, I'll pass headers, and in this case I'm of course expecting Axios to be there. In your case, if you want to use different API, you can use different API, and then you can put a wrapper on those API. It will be highly beneficial for you to modify the functionalities and play around the functionalities. You will get a clear in depth of the function which you are going to modify, and it will make you more strong in the coding or in the architecture flow, right? So let's do this without talking much. I will do app options, right? We are done with the get function. Now next what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly create a couple of more method over here. This is nothing but a method, okay? The same method, using the same method we are going to trigger request. We all saw that in Postman, right? We are creating an API of a certain method, right? If I'll open the Postman, you can see here we created create user of the method post. We created login of the method post, right? Similarly, we can have these much of methods present over there. So as of now, I'm just going to use post, and later we'll see get and put, patch and delete as well. All right. So let's go back, and then here I'm going to paste it. I'll say post. Fine. In that case also I'm expecting the same parameter, but this time get won't be there. I'll say post. So in the case of post, we'll be having one more parameter over here, which is of course data, and then I'm going to add data over here, right? And this is the structure we are going to maintain. And why I'm going to maintaining this, I'm keeping Axios in mind and writing this method. Let's say tomorrow I want to use some different library. I need to modify here only, and then every places it will be working fine. We don't need to change any piece of code. That's the beauty of abstracting the things, right? So now I'm going to create one more method over here, and I'll call this time as a patch. Fine. So patch will have data. So instead what I'll do is I'll just copy this function and paste it, and just change the method name patch. Here also I'm going to change the method name patch. Fine. Then we'll have put as well. Now there's concept revolving around patch and put. So what is the difference between patch, put and post? Because these all are going to post the data. We are going to send the data in the body, right? Then why we have these three? So it's just a convention that patch and put. Post is basically we are going to post some data, okay? The raw data which we are going to post, and based on that certain functionality will happen. But in case of patch and put, patch will be used as a convention. Will assume, basically server is assuming, if we are going to call patch function, server is basically assuming, even it won't work in that way exactly, but by convention we should assume that okay, this is patch, that means it is going to update certain data partially. All right. So what is put then? Put is nothing. The data which we are going to send may or may not exist on the server or the database. So in that case, if data does not exist, it is going to save those data into the database, and if it exists, it is just going to update that. This is the convention of patch and put. No rocket science, right? So finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to say delete. We need to delete as well, so I will say delete. So throughout this tutorial I will be using get, post, patch, put or delete. All right. So we cannot use delete directly. Instead I'll say remove, since delete is one of the reserved keyword in JavaScript. Hope I'm clear, right? So here what I'll do is I'll just use delete. I will save it, and then I'll say return finally and get instance, which I have created above. Now this get instance will return get, post, patch, put, and then finally remove. Remove is nothing but of course delete. So finally we are done with creating our client, API client. And then how we are going to use this? So what we will do is we'll go back to, okay, we need to create one more file over here, api.js, which will contain all the APIs which has to be called from the application, but you can further divide it into some module, like you can say auth module, or you can say user module, and basically it depends on you how you want to. If you will split it as further more and more, it will be very easy to maintain, so that we won't be having lot of functionalities in a single place and things will be messy, right? To avoid those scenarios, you can split that. But here I'm just going to create one file, api.js. Still, if you guys are not able to visualize that, you are not able to understand that, please put down your comments in the comment section. I will try to address all those issues. All right. So here what I'm going to say is I'm going to import, and then I'm going to say I need login URL, right? So it's getting imported from login, and then I'll say I need Axios as well as a client, so that I will pass this client and we'll get an instance of the API client. How we can do that, we'll see that here. So Axios, I'll say fine. Now I will say import, right, get API client, right? Fine, we have a API client but not the instance. So what I'll do is I'll say API client equals to get API client, and this needs the exact API client For that, we are going to pass Axios over here, since we are going to use Axios throughout this application. Cool. Now what I'm going to say finally is export constant. Alright, and then I'm going to say API. Alright, so here I'm going to create one method, login, and I'll say asynchronous. This is going to be, of course, asynchronous method. We'll be receiving data, params, headers, and then app options. Alright, this app options is nothing but this is just I created because if we want to send certain data from the application that is related to application only, that doesn't need to go on server, so we can intercept those requests and take out this app option data, and we can do the centralized functionality over there. We'll see that in action later. Okay, now here we need to write constant. Finally here we are going to put the network call. Okay, so I'll say await, and of course API client. We have post function. We created post function on this API, right? So I'll say post, fine, and it's expecting URL data. So URL will be, of course, login URL, right? And the data we are getting in the params, and then params also we are getting in the parameters, and then we have headers, and finally we'll pass app options. Cool. Now we are going to return this response, and we'll get this response. Fine. We are done with creating the login API finally for our Vuejs application, and how we are going to call this. That's the next question, right? So you just need to follow this tutorial all the way from the very scratch, right? So that you can get a better understanding of it. You need to code line by line so that you can understand it better. Okay. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer your question how we can call this API. So for that what I'll do is I'll go in the action, and here I'm going to import that API which we have created. So I'll say import API. Cool. I'll say .js, and here now finally I'm going to define login function for action. Okay, and this action will be responsible for returning a promise. Cool. So I'll say login, right? I'll say login, and then here we'll be passing what? We'll be passing those headers, app options, since if we want to pass some default header to the API, we can pass, we should have option to pass those as well, and then data, of course, it will be there. But in case of action method, we saw in case of getters we have access to state as the first parameter. We saw in mutation we have the access of state, and then we can send second parameter as a data, right? Similarly in action we have access of commit and dispatch as well. We'll see that what is the use case of this. Okay, so that is going to be the first parameter, but second parameter, of course, we need data, right? So here I can say login data, right? Actually this will get injected from the Vuex, right? Since we registered this on store, so Vuex internally will inject this commit and then dispatch method over here, and we should be able to use it. Okay, so now what I'm going to say is data equals to, I have API access over here, so what I'll say API dot login. That's as simple as that, right? We have created that login functionality here. We have used same inside the actions method. Why? Because this action method will return promise, and we are good. We'll say here async, so that we can use await for that. And then this login is expecting certain data. So it is expecting login data. Then login data will have data, will pass in certain format. so that we can manage it easily. So it will accept params as well. I'll say login data dot params if there's params, and then headers as well. So I'll say login data dot headers, and then app options as well. So I can say login data dot app options. Even though if we are not going to pass this not required but the optional parameter, there's nothing to worry, right? Since this is an optional object, automatically it will assign a new object at the time of when we are calling this method, right? But why we are doing this? Because we will have access to all this property till the component or the page level, so that if we want certain data to be passed to that API, specific API, we should be able to pass. This is how we are going to make, how we should make a functionality so that it is highly flexible. Got it, right? Now next what I'm going to do is, if data is there, that means I will say commit, right? I'll say commit, and what this commit is actually, commit is nothing, it is a method which is getting injected using Vuex store. This commit will say, okay, you can commit the mutation with its name and then data, right? So we saw that how we can create a mutation. This is how we created mutation, and then how we are going to use this. We are going to use using this mutation name. So this time I'm going to use this, and then the second parameter mutation was expecting is of course the data. So the data which we want to pass from here, what I will do is I will do data dot data. Why I am doing this? Because data will be coming inside data. Actual data will be there inside data. Because we named it as, okay, let's name it as a response. So it will be response.data. Now it is much clearer, right? It's not confusing actually. So fine, we have committed this mutation. That means this mutation is going to change the state finally. Once the state is changed, this getter will get invoked, as we know the concept of Vuex store, right? And then if we are using this getter anywhere in the component or anywhere in the page, then those components will re-invoked, or you can say the component will get invoked, re-rendered. Cool? That is the concept of Vuex and then actions. So finally, we have imported dispatch here, but we have not used that. We'll use that later. First, let's see how we can do this with commit, okay? So now for now I'm just going to give you a certain simple definition over here. This dispatch is nothing. If we want to call a certain store, right, a certain different store, or you can say we are going to call different action method over here, so we can use dispatch for that. So for committing a mutation, we are going to use commit. For calling the action method, we are going to use dispatch. This you have to remember. All right, let me save it, and we are done with this login API. Now we have created all those things which we need. Now we are going to go back in the login component and we'll see how we can use these actions, okay? I'll go here, and Vuex is having map getter and map actions, okay? But in this case, I'm going to, since I need actions only, so I'm going to import actions only. For that, I have one method map actions. And from where it is getting imported? It is going to be imported from Vuex, right? So now what this map actions will do? Map actions will do nothing, but it will map all those actions method with your methods, right? You don't have to write your own from scratch. That's cool, right? It's a reusable function. And how we can do that? So here what I'm going to say, you need to destructure all those methods inside this methods block. So I'll say map actions, and then I'll do like this, and very first parameter is going to be the store name. That's where the store names comes into picture. So we can have multiple modular store, right? But how we are going to access that? Of course, we are going to access those with their names. So I'll say auth store, and then second is going to be an object. It can be an array as well, but in this case I can be, if I'm going to use object notation, I can be import that method in the with some alias name. Okay, so let's say we have that login functionality over there, right? So I'll say login, and then the actual method name which exists there in the actions login. So I can name it as a sign in as well. This is alias name, all right, and this should be the actual method name which exists on actions. Let me save it, and then finally here we are going to trigger that functionality. How we can do that? Of course, we'll just call this dot sign in, and then this sign in is expecting some data, right? So data is going to what? Data is going to be, of course, email and password. Cool. And we cannot do this, so what we need to do is we need to say this dot email, since to access a specific variable on page or component we need to use this in options API. All right, so I'll say this dot password. Cool. Now apart from data we need certain more variables. Let's say app options. We don't need to pass header as well as params over here because we don't need that. If you want to pass, you can pass, that is completely optional. Okay, so app options, what I'm going to pass here is I'm going to say, okay, it will be an object, and then inside that let's say IDs to be unblocked. So basically when we are going to trigger some functionality, it is going to call API, but till that time our loader should be showing there, right? And then once the functionality is completed, this ID should be unblocked, right? So I'll say IDs to be unblocked, and then I'll pass those ID here. Fine, I'll save it. We are done with the login functionality. And then finally we need to do one more thing over here which we left before. I will go in URL. You can see we have imported env, but we have not created env over here. So for that, what I'm going to do is I am just going to right click and create one file with name .env .development. Okay, we can have multiple stage of env file. Okay, basically we are going to say, okay, this env file we are going to use for development, because our development URL can be different, right? Our staging URL can be different, and our production environment can be different. So that's why we have segregated this in a separate env file. So this time I'm going to say .env .development. This is the naming convention you need to follow for sure. Okay, .env .development, right? And then I'm going to create this vite. What's the name there? It's going to be with name vite API URL. All right. So I'll just go back to this env development, and here I'll put that variable name, and I'm going to use HTTP. Of course, I'm going to use localhost. So what I'll do here is localhost, and then the port name on which our Golang application is to run. So I'll say it's 667 in this case, and yeah, this is going to be the base path, right? And the same base path we have imported over here in the URL, and then it will work accordingly. So this is the expectation. Let's see if this works or not. Before that, I'll just verify if everything is working fine. Yeah, everything is working fine, and server is restarted. I'll go back to page, and here I will just refresh the page. One more thing I want to show you guys here. I'll just click on inspect. Okay, and then you can see here view options there, right? So from where this view options is coming, this is nothing but dev tools. You can search for it, view dev tools. It will help you to debug your application on the browser. Okay, so you can see here dev tools over there, right? You can just go inside this dev tools and add this dev tool as an extension in your Chrome extension. Fine. So I'll just click on view dev tools over here, and I'll just stretch it ahead, and you can see here get started. I'll click on this Now we have lot of options here. We have the components which is being rendered over there. You can see we have this much of component. This is main ion router outlet, and then inside that we have home page which is getting rendered. We already saw that, right? So once we'll open this home page, we'll have menu as well as ion page, and then inside ion page once more we'll have this content, right? And then inside content we embedded ion router outlet, right? This is nothing but the component, the file which we made, right? The same is being shown here. So now finally we can see we have the login page being rendered here. So if I'll click on login page, you can see email and password is empty. Now as soon as I'll start changing this email password, you can see there it will start changing, right? Now I'll say password. Okay, still that debugger is there. I need to remove those debugger from there. I'll click play and then I'll go back to view. So you can say you can see here I'm going to type password, right? As soon as I am entering the data, it is getting reflected over here. This is the concept of two-way binding. Okay, now we have email and password. Finally I am just going to click login and we will see all those network requests here. That means API call should happen here and it should show here. Let me just click on login and we'll see what happens. So after 6 seconds it will trigger. Why? Because we have called that functionality in a, set timeout functionality. That is why this is happening. So I'll just go back to console and we'll see API client.post is not a function. So that is the different error. We need to just rectify those errors. Why? Because, okay, we'll go back here and this API client should have this post functionality, but it is not there. Why it happens like that? So if I'll say, okay, we cannot do this like post. Instead what we need to do is we need to get the instance. All right, now this instance will have access to post, right? Post, put, or any method which we have defined over there. Let me just save it and go back to UI once more. Page, you can see it's being reloaded, and then I'll open this dev tools just to see if the value is getting binded. Of course we saw that before, but we'll confirm that once more over here. I'm going to put email ID deucent21@gmail.com and then password as password. Since we have registered this user with the name Deucent and then password is password, right? So what I'll do next here is, you can see email and password is getting changed. I will go back to network tab to see if API call will happen or not. I'll trigger this button. You can see the API call happens here, but it is returning with certain response. You can see email and password is also being, it is being sent to or pushed to the server with the request payload. The same thing which we were doing with the client postman, right? Same thing now is getting happened from here. So that's how we are going to call the API throughout our application, and that's how we are going to modify our state variable. And one more thing, we need to verify whether that store has been initialized with a specific name or not. How we can verify that? We have, you can see we have, okay, here we have Vuex store, right? You can just click on it and you can say, you can see auth store is there. Once I'll click on this auth store, you can see the data or state which you have defined there, right? Logged in user and the user ID. You can define n number of state variable over here, and then you can define n number of getter variable as well. Not variable, it's of course a method which is returning the actual state variable. Right, this is how we are going to use Vuex throughout our application. This is how we are going to call API. Now why it is not being successful? Because our Golang server is not running. So let's make that work. What I'll do is I'll just go back to Golang server, and how I can do that, I will do change directory and then this time server. Okay. Next what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call air. It will automatically start my server, Golang server. And then you should be able to trigger this API. Of course, you are able to trigger this API from the UI, right? UI interface. but it should reach our server as well and respond back with success. That's the expectation here. Let's see that in action if it works. It's still taking time, it's building. So first time it should be taking time, but in the subsequent build it should happen as early as possible. It should happen very quickly. All right. Meanwhile, I'll go back to UI and then I'll show you how we can explore all those things from here. You can see here timeline as well. So this is nothing but any event which you are going to emit, or any input event, like if you clicked on a keyboard event and then mouse event, those all are getting captured from here. So you can track those inside timeline, and then we have pages over there as well. So all the routes which we have defined there, right, that all route is coming here. You can see by default we have defined one route with slash, and then we have defined one route with login as well, right? So that all are showing here. And then if we are going to define lot more route, that again will be shown here. And this is the component where we'll be seeing all those components which we have used inside our Vue application. Let me go back and see if still it's building. Let's wait a couple of minutes and then we'll start triggering the API from the UI, right? Okay, now finally the Golang application is running. So what we'll do is we'll just go back to client and then we'll try to request the API once more, and we'll see if this is getting successful or not. So I'll just click on login, and okay, moving forward we just need to remove those set timeout functionality so that the functionality will get executed as soon as possible, right? Now we are seeing this, we are getting this course error. What does this error means actually? This is saying that okay, you are calling the API, that's fine, but it's actually reaching to the server, but then you are calling the API from different origin. All right, so then the question is how we are going to say that you need to trust this API, you need to trust the source of this API from where it is coming. Okay, and how we are going to say that, we'll see that in action. Now we are going to resolve that course error. For that, what we are going to do is we are going to open this server file, server folder actually, and then we are going inside the middleware. Since that course should be handled globally, each request should trust those routes, right? Not route, but the actual origin of the request. So for that, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create middleware.go file, right? And then I'm going to say, of course, very first thing first, I'm going to say package is going to be middleware, right? And then I'm going to say func, I'll say func, and I'll say course middleware. All right, and then this is going to be again a functionality, middleware functionality. So all those middleware functionality which we are going to define must contain this method signature, that is gin.context. Is nothing but a handler function. Okay, so here we are going to say c.writer dot header. All right, not C, we can say context ctx. Actually this is the variable you can use with C as well, it's just name, right? So ctx dot writer and header. In this case I'm just going to set access control origin. Okay, so I'll say access control and then allow, I'll say origin, and then the origin name which we are expecting the request will be coming from. So of course our origin will be the web application, or you can say it's going to be a mobile application, right? In this case I'm expecting web application to be here. So I'll say the request will be coming from http localhost, right? And the port is going to be 8100 because our client application is running on port 8100 if we'll go back, right? So then next what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put one more functionality over here. I'll just say if ctx dot request dot method, this is how we are going to access the method of the request. Okay, so I'll say options, all right. So in that case what I'm going to say is abort with the status 204, abort with status, and then I'm going to put 204. Finally I'll put return over here, and then of course the request should go next onto the next middleware function, or it is going to be land on the controller. For that what I'm going to say is ctx dot next. I'll call next functionality on this, and then of course we need to import gin here. For that I'm going to do import statement over here, and I'll say github.com, and then I'll say gin-gonic and then /gin. Fine. Now we have finally successfully imported that gin functionality, and then I'll just save it. And where we are going to use this, we are going to register this course middleware on our main application so that it will be applicable on all of the routes which we have defined, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going back on main.go application, right? And here what I'm going to say app.use, and then I can say middleware dot get, what was the name of the function? Not get but course middleware, right? So I'll go back here and I'll just copy paste this course middleware. Now this should import this middleware automatically here, but it's not getting imported. What I'll do, I'll just copy paste this here, and then I'll do middleware since it resides in the middleware function, right? So I'll just then click on Control S, save. I'll save it, and it is still not able to save. There's some error with my VS Code. It's taking much time. I believe the error is with system. I need to repair my system. So this should not be actually C, it should be ctx dot abort with a status. All right, I'm going to just save it, and let's wait a couple of seconds. If this has been saved successfully, then we should be see that in action. All right, so finally this has been saved successfully, and then my server has been restarted. Okay, let's go back to UI, and there we should be able to see all those in actions. Okay, this is not the actual page, this is the actual page here. So once more I'm going to trigger this request, and let's see if that works. Again we are getting course error, and then we need to rectify this. So once more what we'll do is we'll go back to this course middleware, and then here what I'm going to say is you just need to, I'll just do copy paste. All right, and this time what I'm going to say is, okay, this time I'm going to say you need to set credential as well. So allow credentials, and I'm going to say true. All right, and next I'm going to allow headers as well. So I'll put headers, and then I'm going to put all the headers name which I'm going to accept. So I'm going to accept authorization. All right, and then next I'm going to put, not here but here itself, I'm going to put content type. which we are allowing on this specific or on all the specific routes. Okay, so this time I'm going to say accept, fine, and then finally I'm going to allow the methods which we are going to use. So methods, I'm going to use post, right, get, put, patch, and then delete as well, right. Let me just save it, and I will just restart my system, not system, but I'll just restart my application, and then we'll see if that works or not. I'll go back to UI. Meanwhile, what I'll do is okay, this is running successfully. Now I'll just change that set timeout functionality so that we don't need to wait for 6 seconds each of the time. For that, what I'm going to do is I'll just go back in the component folder, and here we have a app button over there, right? So what I'll do is I'll just cut out of this set timeout function, and I'll paste it outside, and then this should be working finally now. So the server should have been restarted automatically for the client, and of course server of the backend has been restarted. Let me go back here and I'll do refresh, and then finally we'll enter the data and re-trigger the API. How we are going to do this? Just hussain21@gmail.com, right? And then I'm going to put password as well. So once I'll click on login, it triggers one login functionality. You can see here network request and with this email and payload. Now we should be, if it's successful, we should be able to see preview as well as response there. So you can see here we got the response back with but this time successfully saved. Instead it should say something else. Okay, but at last we are getting the data of the specific user, right? We are getting email, name, password, and then the ID of the user as well. Now one more thing here, we need to verify if this data is being successfully saved in a store also. For that I'm going to go back in the Vuex store, and how we can do that, we know that we just need to click on view tab here, and then I'll click on Vuex. So let me go back to auth store, and here you can see logged in user, how it is getting assigned. We don't need this message and status code here. We'll rectify those over in the next video. So you can see data we have user and token. Of course this is required. So in this logged in user, actually this user data should get feeded, but we will rectify those over the period of time. All right. So now in this video we learned all the concept of Vuex, how it is working, and then how we are going to create getter actions, and how we can create whole store in a modular way, and we can use the namespace so that we can access those specific store, and then we can import that in our component as well as page, and then you can use it. Moreover, in the upcoming videos we'll see how we can use getters and how it is reactive. Those all concepts we'll see in the upcoming videos. Thank you guys. We'll meet in the next video.